Bloodroots. Michael S. Freeman. All rights reserved. Disclaimer. This is a work of fiction. Any similarities to real people, living or dead, are purely coincidental. While the story incorporates real locations, including Lebanon, Missouri, and Bennett Springs State Park, the events, characters, and supernatural elements depicted are entirely fictional. No real-life crimes, historical events, or individuals are connected to the events of this story in any way. This audio is meant for entertainment purposes only and does not reflect reality, nor does it imply any supernatural or criminal occurrences tied to the places mentioned. The use of real-world locations is for atmospheric storytelling and should not be taken as factual or representative of these areas. Readers should remember that this is a horror story crafted to create an unsettling and immersive experience. Enjoy the nightmare responsibly. Dedication. This audio is dedicated to the wonderful folks of Lebanon, Missouri. I have made this town home for most of my natural life and have had many great encounters with the people of my community. Epilogue. The Warning. 1800s, Lebanon, Missouri. The air carried the scent of burnt wood and something darker, something that clung to the inside of the lungs like a sickness. Sheriff Philip Keene stood at the edge of the smoldering wreckage, staring at what remained of the Benbows Inn. The fire had done its work, turning the once imposing structure into a blackened skeleton of timber and collapsed beams. The ground was soft with ash and blood, a thick mixture that had settled into the dirt like a wound that refused to close. Smoke still curled from the ruins, the last remnants of heat glowing in the embers, but the fire hadn't burned hot enough to erase everything. Bones jutted from the earth, some human, others twisted into unnatural shapes, their lengths too long, their joints too sharp. The bodies beneath the floorboards had been worse than expected. Not just travelers, not just missing men and women. There had been children, whole families, bones gnawed clean, skulls stacked in the root cellar like discarded husks. The posse had come expecting murderers. They had found something else entirely. Philip exhaled slowly, wiping the sweat from his brow, though the heat of the fire had long since faded. The men behind him had begun to shift, their nervous energy evident in the silence they kept. No cheers, no victory shouts, just the weight of knowing that they had seen something that could not be undone. A sound from the tree line pulled Philip's attention. It was faint but distinct, something wet shifting through the undergrowth. He turned, scanning the tree line, the low fog curling between the trunks like a living thing. The Missouri woods stretched endlessly beyond the burned-out property, thick with tangled brush and the echoes of the past. Philip took a slow step forward, his boots sinking into the soft ground. The smell of rot curled up from the earth. Ahead, just beyond the reach of the fire's destruction, the dirt had been disturbed, turned over as if something had recently been buried. A shallow grave, half collapsed in the heat of the night. The bones inside were wrong. They were too long in places, the joints twisted, the skulls shaped in a way that made his stomach turn. Some had extra teeth embedded in the bone, others bore the evidence of fractured, unnatural growths. Philip clenched his jaw, pushing back the nausea rising in his throat. They had thought the fire had purged it all, burned the sickness out of the Benbow bloodline. But now, staring down into the grave, he felt the certainty slip away. A shift in the woods, a presence, watching. Philip lifted his head, scanning the shadows. The trees remained still, the fog curling low, but the feeling remained. Something had not died with the others. A sound, soft and distant, laughter. Not the laughter of a child, not really. It was wrong, pitched too high, carrying through the trees like a whisper on the wind. Philip's hand went to his revolver, fingers tightening around the worn handle. He turned toward the sound. But there was nothing, only the forest stretching endlessly before him, and the knowledge settling deep in his bones. This was not over. Chapter 1. The last night of Samuel Cooper, one night before the fire. The night smelled of wet earth and copper, the air thick with the weight of something unseen. Samuel Cooper stumbled forward, his breath ragged, his side throbbing where the knife had sunk deep. His fingers pressed against the wound, but the warmth spilling between them told him everything he needed to know. He was losing too much blood. He needed to keep moving. The Missouri woods stretched endless and dark, the canopy thick enough to swallow the moonlight. Shadows pooled between the trees, deepening into places where the light never reached, and the path ahead was little more than a twisting, uneven trail of half-hidden roots and loose dirt. Something moved behind him. Footsteps. Not hurried, not panicked, deliberate, measured. He did not turn to look. His boots skidded on the damp ground, nearly sending him sprawling forward, but he caught himself against the rough bark of a tree. The forest was closing in, the air too heavy, pressing in from all sides. The town was ahead, if he could just get to the trail, if he could just make it past the clearing. The movement ahead stopped him cold. A small figure stood in the path, barely illuminated by the thin shafts of moonlight cutting through the trees. His daughter. She was barefoot, her nightgown filthy, streaked with dirt and something darker. Her hair hung in tangled ropes, framing a face that was both familiar and entirely alien. Samuel's breath hitched. Her eyes were too large, too dark, too empty. Something twitched beneath her skin, a slow ripple that made his stomach churn. She stood too still, her body unnaturally rigid, her hands hanging limply at her sides, as if she had forgotten how to use them. The woods behind him remained silent, but he knew they were there, watching, waiting. The sickness ran deep in the Benbow blood, twisting generation after generation into something no longer human. The inbreeding had turned them feral, their bones reshaped by years of sickness, their bodies morphing into things that should not exist. And now, it had reached his daughter. Samuel felt his stomach clench, the horror tightening like a vice around his ribs. His daughter's mouth twitched, stretching wider than it should have, her lips pulling back to reveal teeth too sharp, too uneven, too wrong. She did not blink, did not breathe, only stared. A rustling came from the trees, the sound of something shifting in the undergrowth, heavy and wet. Samuel did not wait. His body moved before his mind could catch up, his legs propelling him forward, past the child, past the nightmare that had once been his daughter. A whisper of movement, a breath against his neck, the sensation of something just behind him, reaching. The clearing broke open ahead, the town, the trail. His boots slammed against the dirt, his pulse thundering in his ears, the trees splitting apart around him. Then he saw them, more figures, pale and thin, their limbs too long, their bodies bent at unnatural angles. Some stood half-hidden in the brush, others perched in the trees like waiting birds, their eyes black as the sky above them. Samuel did not stop. His vision blurred, his heartbeat slamming like a war drum, his body screaming for rest. But he ran through the clearing, through the town's edge, into the dirt road, past the first lanterns, past the first houses. His legs gave out. The ground met him hard, knocking the breath from his lungs. Dimly, voices rose around him, shouts and hurried steps, the flicker of torchlight against the darkness. Hands grabbed him, pulling him upright, but Samuel's world had narrowed to one thought, one final message that had to be spoken before his body failed him. He lifted his head, blood trailing from his lips, and whispered, "Burn it." Then the world went black. The men stood in grim silence, watching the unconscious body of Samuel Cooper. The sheriff stepped forward, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned to his men. "We ride for the inn." And they rode straight into hell. Chapter 2. The Road to Bennett's Spring. Lebanon, Missouri, present day. The Munger Moss Motel stood like a decaying relic of the past, the neon sign flickering, buzzing faintly in the cool evening air. It had once been a proud landmark along Route 66, a stopping place for weary travelers moving through the Ozarks. But time had not been kind. The red paint peeled from the wooden siding, and the old vacancy sign swung gently in the breeze, its chains rattling like whispered voices in the dark. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a couple of rusting pickup trucks and a single black sedan, parked far away from the entrance. The place had the kind of silence that stretched too long between sounds, the kind that settled deep in the chest, gnawing at some primal part of the brain that recognized when something was just off. Inside, the front office smelled of stale coffee, mildew, and dust, the air thick with neglect. The overhead fan spun lazily, creaking with every slow rotation. Behind the counter, a man sat hunched over, his eyes half-lidded, his breath wheezing. Benjamin Benbow. He was pale, his skin waxy and stretched too thin over his bones, like he had forgotten how to be human a long time ago. His hair, once thick and black, had begun to thin at the top, revealing a scalp mottled with dark patches. His teeth were slightly too small for his mouth, making his grin unsettlingly tight. He didn't look up when the glass door swung open, the bell above it jangling dully. Kathy stepped inside, shivering as the cold air wrapped around her like an unwanted hand. The motel felt wrong, but she tried to shake the feeling off. She was just tired, that was all. Julie and Connor entered behind her, the door closing with a slow, deliberate hiss. Outside, the parking lot remained still, swallowed in the dim glow of the buzzing street lamp. The group. They had been on the road for hours, the long stretch of highway warping into a blur of asphalt and flickering roadside signs. The trip had been a spur-of-the-moment decision, something to break the monotony of the semester, a last-minute getaway before midterms swallowed them whole. Julie had suggested it. Bennett Spring is supposed to be beautiful this time of year, she had said, scrolling through pictures on her phone. The river, the trails, and the caves. That had caught Connor's attention. "You know I can't resist a good cave," he had joked, grinning over the steering wheel. Sean, as usual, had just shrugged. It wasn't until they had started driving that the unease settled in. Maybe it was the way the trees along the highway seemed to loom taller the deeper they got into the Ozarks, their twisted branches reaching like fingers, casting jagged shadows over the road. Maybe it was the radio static, how every station seemed to fade the further they drove, replaced by crackling silence, the occasional whisper of something just beneath the surface of the noise. Kathy had tried to ignore it. Now, standing inside the dim motel lobby, she wasn't so sure. The moss. Benjamin Benbow finally looked up. His eyes were dark, set deep beneath prominent brow ridges, his expression unreadable. His fingers drummed against the countertop, his nails thick and yellowed, curling slightly at the edges. "Rooms?" His voice was dry, rasping like something had been caught in his throat for too long. Kathy hesitated. Yeah, 2, just for the night." Benjamin's lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite anything. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured. Julie laughed nervously. "Yeah, well, we didn't exactly have many options." Benjamin didn't respond. His eyes flicked past them, toward the door, toward the parking lot outside, scanning something unseen. His fingers stilled against the counter. Then, slowly, he turned and pulled 2 room keys from the wall. "Rooms 6 and 7, he said, sliding them forward. Kathy reached for them, but before her fingers could touch the keys, Benjamin's hand snapped out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was cold, unnaturally cold. "You shouldn't be here," he repeated, his voice lower, more insistent. Kathy yanked her arm back, her pulse hammering. Benjamin smiled too wide, his teeth visible through the dim light. Julie grabbed the keys instead, stepping away from the counter, her movements suddenly tense. "Thanks," she muttered, pulling Kathy along. They didn't look back as they exited the office. Rooms 6 and 7. The hallway was silent, the air thicker here, humid despite the chill in the air. The walls were stained, the wallpaper peeling in places, revealing dark, moldy patches beneath. The floorboards beneath the carpet creaked with every step. Room 6, Room 7. Julie shoved the key into the lock, twisting hard. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing a dark, stale-smelling room. Kathy followed her inside, flipping the switch. The yellow light flickered, struggling before finally humming to life. The room was bare bones, the furniture old and mismatched. A bed, a single nightstand, a wooden dresser with a warped mirror that reflected the room in uneasy distortions. The air smelled of something faintly sour, like old sweat and damp wood. Julie dropped her bag onto the bed, exhaling sharply. "Okay, that guy was creepy as hell," she muttered. Kathy didn't respond. She moved toward the window, pushing aside the thin curtain. Outside, the parking lot stretched emptily, bathed in the dull orange glow of the street lamp. And then, a shadow. Standing at the edge of the lot, just beyond the reach of the light. Tall, still, watching. A figure, barely visible through the mist rolling in from the trees. Kathy's breath hitched. Then the light flickered, and the figure was gone. The night. Something watches. Sleep didn't come easily. Kathy lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled. The air in the room felt heavier now, the silence pressing against her eardrums. Somewhere in the motel, a floorboard creaked. She turned her head. Julie was asleep, her breathing slow and steady. The sound came again, closer this time. A shift in the air. Kathy slowly sat up, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She glanced toward the door. The lock was in place. Then the window. The curtain had been drawn shut when they went to bed. Now it hung slightly open. Her breath stilled. Outside the window, in the dim glow of the flickering neon sign, a face, pale, gaunt, eyes too large, watching. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Kathy's blood turned to ice, the light flickered, and the face was gone. The night stretched on, the motel settling into unnatural silence. Something was out there, and it wasn't human. The night deepens. The motel room felt smaller now, the air thick with an unspoken wrongness, like a presence that had crept in unnoticed. The shadows stretched too long against the walls, flickering with each pulse of the dim yellow light overhead. Kathy sat rigid in bed, her pulse pounding in her ears, her body tense as if expecting something to push through the window at any moment. The image of the face, pale, gaunt, eyes too large, was seared into her mind. It had been there, watching, and then it had simply vanished. She forced herself to breathe slow and deep, but her hands remained clenched into fists at her sides. Julie stirred beside her, shifting under the covers with a soft murmur, oblivious to the weight in the air. Kathy glanced at the window again. The curtain hung motionless, the room silent except for the faint buzz of the flickering light. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe it was just the exhaustion of the long drive playing tricks on her mind. She lay back down, but sleep did not come. Somewhere in the motel, a door creaked open. The sound echoed, stretching through the silence, sending a tremor through her limbs. She held her breath, listening. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving down the hallway outside their room. Not hurried, not rushed, just watching, waiting. The sound reached their door, stopped. Kathy squeezed her eyes shut. She counted the seconds in her head. 1, 2, 3, nothing. And then the doorknob rattled. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't aggressive, wasn't someone knocking or fumbling with the lock. It was testing, pressing, slowly turning. A long, drawn-out attempt to see if it would open. Julie stirred again, murmuring in her sleep. The knob twisted harder, but the lock held. Kathy stayed perfectly still, her chest tight with fear, her body frozen as she stared at the door. The moment stretched, too long, too unnatural, until finally the pressure on the knob eased and the footsteps drifted away down the hall. A long, hollow silence followed. Kathy's body ached from the tension, her heart slamming against her ribs. She exhaled slowly, barely making a sound, but her hands refused to stop shaking. It was a long time before sleep finally came, and even then she dreamed of something standing over her, breath cold against her skin. The general store. The next morning, the sun had barely crested the trees when they left the Munger Moss Motel, the unease still lingering in their bones. Kathy had barely spoken since waking, her body still thrumming with the aftershocks of the night before. She hadn't told Julie about the face in the window, hadn't mentioned the doorknob. It wasn't just paranoia. Something had been outside that door, and she wasn't sure if it had truly left. They drove in near silence, following the winding road toward Bennett Springs State Park, passing by stretches of untouched wilderness, the tree line dense, the road empty. The feeling of being watched never fully went away. At some point, Sean pulled into a tiny roadside general store, its wooden porch sagging with age, a single rocking chair sitting motionless despite the breeze. It looked like something out of time, an old trading post, a forgotten relic. The kind of place where the world had stopped moving decades ago. The sign above the entrance was faded, barely legible. Inside, the smell of dust and old wood filled the air, shelves stocked with cheap supplies, jars of preserves, and odd trinkets covered in years of grime. Behind the counter, an elderly man sat hunched forward, fingers drumming idly against the counter. His eyes were clouded, his face heavily wrinkled, but there was a sharpness behind his blindness, as if he saw something the rest of them couldn't. Clarence Benbow. The moment Kathy stepped inside, his head snapped toward her, his nostrils flaring slightly. A slow smile curled his thin lips, revealing yellowed teeth, some of which had been filed down into uneven points. "You smell like your kin," he muttered. Kathy's stomach twisted violently. Julie shifted beside her, her brows furrowing in confusion. "What?" Clarence didn't answer. Instead, he grinned wider, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm against the wood, his nails too thick, too uneven, curling slightly at the edges like claws. Kathy took a slow step back, every instinct in her body screaming to leave. Julie cleared her throat, clearly unsettled, but tried to force a laugh. "We just need some supplies," she said, grabbing a few bottled waters and snacks. Clarence didn't move, didn't blink. Kathy felt the old man's gaze still locked onto her, his mouth parted slightly like he was sniffing the air. He exhaled slow and deep. "You smell like the old blood," he murmured. Kathy's hands tightened into fists. The air in the store suddenly felt too thick, too heavy, pressing against her chest. Her heart pounded. She turned on her heel and walked out without another word. Julie followed, Sean and Connor exchanging uneasy glances before throwing a few crumpled bills on the counter and hurrying after them. The door swung shut behind them, the bell jingling softly. For a long moment, no one spoke. The forest loomed tall around them, the trees casting long shadows across the ground. Finally, Julie exhaled. "What the hell was that?" Kathy didn't answer. She couldn't shake the feeling that the old man's words had been more than just nonsense. They had felt like a warning, or worse, a promise. The river. The Nyangwa River stretched wide and dark, cutting through the valley like a winding serpent, the water moving lazily beneath the overcast sky. They set up camp along the banks, their tents clustered near the tree line, the fire pit already dug into the damp earth. Julie and Connor sat near the river's edge, their bare feet dangling over the water, the air thick with the sounds of rustling leaves and the distant chirping of insects. Sean had wandered off toward the woods, searching for dry kindling. Kathy sat alone, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes locked on the river's surface. The feeling hadn't left. That same gnawing sensation of being watched. It had followed them from the motel, from the store, from the road itself. She inhaled deeply, trying to push the thoughts away, but something in the water caught her eye. A shape, floating just beneath the surface, drifting closer. For a moment she thought it was a branch, caught in the slow current. Then it surfaced. A hand, bloated, pale, fingers curling slightly as it bobbed against the rocks. Kathy's breath hitched. Julie screamed. Sean came running, his eyes widening as he followed their gaze. Connor scrambled back from the river's edge, his voice tight with panic. "Jesus Christ!" Kathy's hands clenched into fists as her stomach twisted. She already knew. She didn't have to see the body, didn't have to ask who it belonged to. Somewhere deep inside, she already knew the answer. The salesman from the motel, and he hadn't been alone when he died. Chapter 3. The meat in the river. The body in the water. The hand bobbed in the slow-moving current, the pale skin bloated and splitting, the tips of the fingers turning dark, swollen from hours, maybe days, soaking beneath the cold weight of the Nyangwa River. A loose thread of something dark and fleshy trailed from the knuckle, caught against a jagged rock near the shallows. For a moment, nobody moved. The air felt thick, pressing down on them like the very trees had leaned in to listen, to watch. Kathy's stomach churned, a slow, creeping nausea curling up from her gut as she stared at the lifeless limb rocking gently in the water. Julie was the first to break. She stumbled back from the river's edge, one hand clamping over her mouth, her eyes wide with something wild and horrified. Connor's breath came in short, shallow gasps, his face paling beneath the weak morning light. Sean stepped closer, his boots sinking into the damp earth, and reached for a long stick, using it to prod the body. The hand shifted, rolling slightly, and the rest of the arm followed, a piece of the torso broke the surface, half-rotted flesh peeling away in wet ribbons, revealing the dark cavities of an exposed rib cage. The stomach was split open, the edges ragged and torn as if something had fed from it. Kathy turned sharply, her throat tightening. There were bite marks, not clean, not like teeth had been used for precision, but ripping, the flesh torn away in strips, like something had been yanked free and chewed. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. The smell of river rot and decay thickened in the air, mixing with the scent of damp leaves and pine. Sean shoved the stick deeper, turning the body just enough for the head to roll free of the water. Kathy felt her stomach lurch violently. The eyes were missing, not pecked out, not eaten away by fish, but removed, dug out, scooped clean. A single deep puncture wound was burrowed through the forehead, sinking down into the skull. Something had been taken from inside. Sean cursed, dropping the stick, stumbling backward, as though the realization had finally clicked into place. Julie was shaking now, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard, forcing the words through. Is that the guy? From the motel? No one answered, but Kathy already knew. She could see it in the sagging contours of his face, in the way the skin hung too loosely over the bones. It was him, the salesman, the one who had checked in before them. And now he was nothing but bloated flesh and empty sockets, something picked apart, something left to rot. The silence after. The sheriff arrived an hour later, his patrol truck grinding up the dirt path, the old suspension groaning beneath the weight of age and disrepair. Sheriff Lawton Spivey was old, but not in the way that made a man slow down. He was thick-bodied, a man who had lived too long in a town that had stopped needing him years ago. His uniform was faded, his leather belt cracked, and he smelled faintly of cigarettes and damp wool. He took one look at the body and exhaled through his nose, his expression unreadable. "You kids should have left it alone," he muttered. Julie let out a small, half-choked laugh. "Seriously?" Sheriff Spivey didn't look at her. He motioned to the younger deputy, a kid who couldn't have been older than 20, and together they began the slow, methodical process of pulling the body from the river. Water dripped from the loose flesh, thick and blackened with silt. Spivey bent over the corpse, his fingers brushing over the missing eyes, his mouth pulling tight at the sight of the torn open stomach. For a long moment, he was silent. Then, without looking up, he spoke again. "You ain't from here," he muttered, "so you don't know how things work." Sean stiffened slightly, but didn't speak. Spivey sighed, shifting his weight, his knee cracking loudly in the still air. "This river eats things," he murmured, "has for a long time." Kathy felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The way he said it, so final, so unshaken, it wasn't meant to be a warning. It was just a fact, like he'd seen this before, like he expected it. The wind shifted, rolling over the water, and suddenly Kathy was very aware of the trees lining the far side of the riverbank, of the spaces between them, the places where the light didn't quite reach. Something moved there, a shadow, a flicker, then gone. Her blood turned to ice. Sheriff Spivey stood straight, brushing dirt from his pants, and turned toward them with a look that was not unkind, but final. "This is a local matter," he said. "Best if you pack up and leave town." His tone left no room for argument. Kathy exchanged a glance with Julie, then Sean. Connor, who had been quiet through the entire ordeal, finally spoke. We paid for the campsite." Julie shot him a sharp glare, but Spivey only sighed. "You got one night," he muttered. "After that, you go." He turned back toward his truck, motioning for the deputy to help him load the body. The moment was over. The unease remained, the stench of old blood. That night the air carried the faint scent of something rotten, something deep in the soil, in the trees, in the water itself. The fire crackled low, a weak barrier against the encroaching dark. Kathy sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her gaze flickering over the trees, watching the way the shadows stretched unnaturally in the dim glow of the flames. Julie had tried to break the silence, to force normalcy back into their conversation, but the effort had died quickly, swallowed by the weight of what had happened. No one wanted to say it, to admit that the salesman's body had been eaten, that something had dug into him, hollowed him out, stripped him down like a predator that had done this before. Sean stirred the fire with a long, blackened stick, his expression unreadable. "I don't think animals did that," he muttered. Kathy swallowed hard. She had been thinking the same thing. Julie exhaled sharply. "Let's just get through the night," she said, her voice too thin, too strained. "We leave first thing in the morning." No one argued. They wouldn't sleep easy, and in the deepest part of the night, when the fire had burned low and weak, Kathy woke suddenly to the feeling of something standing just outside the tent. The air was too still. She turned her head slowly, beyond the flap, beyond the flickering glow of the dying fire. A shape, standing at the edge of the woods, motionless, watching. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there. The wind shifted, pushing the smell of rot and damp earth through the tent. Kathy squeezed her eyes shut. She didn't move, didn't breathe, and slowly, too slowly, the figure faded back into the trees. Chapter 4. The Murmurs in the Trees. The Stillness Before Dawn. The forest did not sleep. Long after the fire had burned low, after the last embers had sunk into the dirt like dying stars, the trees remained restless. Kathy lay awake in the darkness of the tent, her body tense, frozen, her breath locked in her throat. She had counted the minutes, then the hours, listening to the rhythmic breathing of Julie beside her, to the occasional shifting of Sean and Connor in their tents just a few feet away. But beyond that, beyond the thin canvas walls, the woods were breathing too. The wind had died sometime after midnight, leaving the air thick and motionless. And yet, the trees moved. The branches swayed in slow, unnatural patterns, the leaves whispering without a breeze to carry them. Something was out there, watching, waiting. She had seen it. A figure, standing at the tree line, motionless, silhouetted against the black backdrop of the woods. It had been there for an hour, maybe longer. It had not moved, not forward, not back, just standing. The longer she watched, the harder it was to tell if it was human at all. At first, she had convinced herself it was just a shadow, a trick of the firelight casting shapes against the undergrowth. But shadows did not stand still when the light flickered. Shadows did not watch. A dry rasp of wind moved through the campsite, ruffling the fabric of the tent. Kathy's body locked up. The smell changed. The damp, woodsy scent of pine and earth was suddenly overpowered by something deeper, something wrong. A sweet, cloying rot, like meat left in the sun for too long. Something wet and soft, turning black from the inside out. Her stomach churned. The air itself felt heavier, pressing down on her chest, making each breath shallower than the last. She squeezed her eyes shut, counting backward in her head. 5, 4, 3. When she opened them again, the figure was gone. But the smell remained. Dawn and the scent of decay. The sun rose slow and weak, spilling a dull gray light across the riverbank. Kathy had barely slept at all. By the time the first hints of daylight bled into the sky, she could hear Julie stirring beside her, the zipper of the tent hissing open, followed by a groggy murmur. She didn't answer, didn't move. Her body was still locked in the memory of the night before. By the time she finally crawled out of the tent, the campsite was already awake, though no one looked fully rested. Sean sat near the dead fire pit, rubbing a hand down his face, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Connor stood by the river, staring out across the slow-moving current, his posture unusually tense. Julie was muttering to herself, shoving things into her backpack with sharper, more forceful movements than usual. Kathy wiped at her face, blinking against the morning light. "What time is it?" Sean shrugged. 7, maybe 8. Julie zipped her bag shut with a sharp jerk. "We should go." Kathy hesitated. "We have the site until noon." Julie turned to face her, something flickering behind her expression, something too raw, too unsettled. "Yeah, well," she exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to her temple. "I don't feel like waiting." Kathy could see it, the nerves, the unease crackling under her skin like a live wire. She wasn't the only one who had felt it, the wrongness in the air, the weight of something unseen. Even Sean, who had been the most calm, the most indifferent about everything up to this point, was sitting stiffly, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm against his knee. Connor didn't even turn away from the river. Kathy stepped closer, her brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" Connor swallowed hard. He didn't answer. Kathy followed his gaze, scanning the opposite riverbank, but saw nothing. Just trees, thick with morning mist. Then she saw it. Something was wrong with the water. It had looked normal at first, the usual dark green blue, reflecting the dull sky above, but just beneath the surface, barely visible through the shifting current. The color was wrong. A dark, rust-colored stain, bleeding outward, swirling gently with the movement of the river. Like something deep beneath the water was leaking, like something was rotting beneath them. Kathy's throat tightened. Sean stood, following their gaze, his face paling. "Jesus," he muttered. Julie moved closer, her breath hitching. "What is that?" The question hung between them, unanswered, and then a bubble, slow, thick, breaking the surface. Then another and another, a trail of them, moving against the current. Something was rising. Sean took an instinctive step back, but Connor didn't move. His shoulders had gone rigid, his breathing suddenly shallow. The bubbles grew larger, foaming up through the water. Then a sound, low, distant, like something shifting deep beneath the surface. A wet murmur echoing upward, vibrating against the air. Then silence. The stain of blood slowly unfurled, spreading further outward. Julie exhaled sharply, shoving past them. "I'm done. I'm leaving." She turned, storming toward the car, her entire body vibrating with tension. Kathy hesitated, her gaze still locked on the river, on the slow movement of something unseen, something far below them. A shape flickered in the tree line across the bank, not close but watching. A figure, pale, too still, then gone. Kathy inhaled sharply. Sean grabbed his bag. "I think she's right." Kathy took one last look at the river, at the dark stain blooming beneath the surface, at the tangled mass of trees beyond the bank. She turned and followed them back to the car. The drive back. The road twisted through the dense forest, winding back toward the highway, the trees pressing close against the edges of the asphalt. Julie was driving too fast, her fingers tight on the wheel, her shoulders hunched. The silence in the car was thick, stretching between them like a living thing. Kathy stared out the window, her reflection barely visible in the glass, warped by the motion of the car. The trees blurred together, shapes flickered between them. The sound of the river still rumbled in the back of her mind, the way it had shifted, the way something unseen had moved just beneath the surface. A hand pressed against the glass. Kathy's heart jerked violently, her body seizing up. It was there, for just a second. A pale hand, fingers too long, pressed against the window outside. But they were going 60 miles an hour. She turned sharply. Nothing. Only the trees. Only the wind. Julie's grip on the wheel tightened. "Did you hear that?" Kathy swallowed hard, forcing her pulse to slow down. "Hear what?" Julie shook her head. "Never mind." The car sped up, the trees whipping past faster. The motel was up ahead, a place they never should have stopped, a place that had already marked them without them knowing. Chapter 5. The murmurs follow. The drive away from something they couldn't leave behind. The highway stretched ahead, empty, twisting through the forest, the trees pressing in close from either side. The car was silent, but not comfortably so. The kind of silence that was heavy, unnatural, stretched too thin over something deeper, something lurking beneath it. Julie's hands were tight on the wheel, her knuckles pale, her fingers clenching every time the tires hit a crack in the pavement. Sean sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on the road, not really watching it. Connor had the back seat to himself, head resting against the window, fingers tapping a restless rhythm against his thigh. Kathy kept her gaze fixed outside. The trees blurred together, dark shapes against the dull gray sky. There was no radio playing, no idle conversation to fill the emptiness. Only the sound of the engine, the hum of tires on asphalt, and the occasional click of Julie's jaw when she gritted her teeth too hard. Kathy had the distinct uneasy feeling that they were being followed, not by a car, not by anything human. Something unseen, something stretching through the spaces between the trees, keeping pace just beyond the reach of their headlights. Every time she blinked, she swore she saw movement in the peripheral edges of her vision. A flicker of pale skin, a flash of something long and thin slipping between the trees. The air felt thicker, heavier, like the weight of the forest was pressing in against the glass of the car, suffocating them. Julie swallowed hard, the sound too loud in the quiet car. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "I don't think we should have stopped there." No one responded, because there was nothing to say, and a lingering stain. The Munger Moss Motel looked different in the daylight. It should have been less threatening, less wrong. But in the early afternoon sun, the peeling paint looked worse. The warped siding seemed to sink into itself, and the old neon sign, off now, its red glow nothing but a ghost, stood like a marker for something that shouldn't still be standing. The air was warm, but the wind that rolled down the highway had a bite to it, an edge that carried something rotted and distant. Julie pulled into the lot, throwing the car into park with too much force. No one moved. No one wanted to get out. Sean rubbed a hand down his face, exhaling. One more night. Connor finally shifted, his voice low. Just one. It was a decision none of them wanted, but they all knew they weren't in any shape to drive further. Not yet. They had barely slept, and none of them wanted to admit that there was a kind of exhaustion that went beyond lack of rest. A weariness that had settled deep into the bones, wrapped around the tendons like something living and pulsing beneath the skin. Kathy grabbed her bag. She had the feeling that no matter how far they drove, the weight in their chests would not leave them, because they were already marked, and something knew it. Checking in. The lobby door swung open with a creak, the bell above it jangling weakly, like even the metal had grown tired of ringing over the years. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of old coffee and something underneath it, something wet, something left in dark corners too long. Benjamin Benbows was waiting. He was already behind the desk, as if he had never moved, never left. His eyes lifted when they entered, his thin lips curling into a smile that wasn't quite a smile. Kathy felt her stomach clench. His teeth were too small for his mouth, giving his grin a strange, skeletal tightness. He did not look surprised to see them. He reached for the keys before Julie had even spoken. "You're back." Julie hesitated, her throat tightening visibly, but she took the keys. The old man's fingers brushed hers when she did. His skin was cold, damp, like something that had never fully dried. "Storm coming tonight," Benjamin murmured. Julie flinched, pulling her hand away. Kathy swallowed. There was no storm in the forecast. Not that she had checked, but she knew. She could feel it in her gut. Benjamin's black eyes flicked to Kathy. "Don't wander tonight." The word sent a shiver through her spine, but he didn't say anything else. He turned, shuffling into the back room, the old door swinging shut behind him. Julie exhaled sharply. "I hate this fucking place." Kathy didn't answer. They were already walking toward their rooms again, back into the long, dim hallway, the carpet threadbare beneath their feet. The walls felt tighter now, the air more humid, thicker with something unseen. The motel felt alive, like it was breathing around them, like it had been waiting. The things moving in the walls. The rain came late, thick and sudden. There had been no sign of it before, no build-up, no warning. Just a single crack of thunder, and then the sky split open, water hammering against the motel's old roof, running in thin streams down the fogged windows. Kathy lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the way the rain hit the glass in uneven patterns. Julie had fallen asleep, her breathing deep and slow, but Kathy had given up on rest hours ago. There was something off about the sound of the storm, something wrong in the rhythm. It wasn't the rain that made her stomach turn, that sent the sharp blade of unease curling down her spine. It was the whispers in the walls, soft, barely there, like something inside the building was shifting, stirring, something that had been waiting for nightfall to move again. She swallowed hard, pushing herself up on unsteady arms, her pulse beating a tight rhythm in her throat. The room was dark, the shadows longer than they should have been, the corners of the ceiling stretching just a little too deep. She turned toward the window. The glass was fogged with moisture, but through it, she saw something standing in the rain, a figure pale and motionless, just beyond the reach of the motel's flickering security light. It was watching the window, not moving, not breathing, just standing. The storm howled around it, but the figure did not sway, did not react, like it wasn't truly there. Kathy's blood turned to ice. She wanted to move, wanted to wake Julie, to say something, to reach for her phone, but she couldn't. Something in her gut screamed not to move, not to breathe, not to let it know she saw it. The rain hit the glass in uneven patterns, and in the briefest moment, the figure's head snapped toward her, like it had felt the thought before she had even moved. The light flickered, and it was gone. But the whispering in the walls did not stop. It grew louder. It moved closer. And Kathy realized with a sharp electric terror, the sound wasn't coming from the walls, it was coming from inside the room. Chapter 6. The walls are listening. The night that would not end. The motel room felt tighter now, like the walls had drawn in an inch closer, trapping the air inside, letting it stagnate in a way that made breathing feel heavier. The storm hadn't let up. If anything, it had grown worse, the rain pounding against the thin motel windows, the wind howling low and ragged, carrying a sound through the gaps in the wood. A hum, a whisper, just beneath the surface of the noise. Kathy sat upright, her back pressed against the headboard, her body tense beneath the motel's thin, musty sheets. She could still see it, the figure in the rain. It had been there. She knew it. Even if it was gone now. Even if it had never been there at all. Julie stirred beside her, shifting, murmuring something in her sleep. The whispers in the room had died down, fading back into the walls, or deeper. Kathy wasn't sure which was worse. The room wasn't quiet. Not really. There was still something beneath the noise of the storm, something that moved just at the edges of hearing. Too faint to pinpoint, but too present to ignore, like someone breathing just behind her ear. She hadn't turned on the light. She didn't want to see. Some instinctive, ancient part of her brain told her that whatever existed in the edges of her perception was only real if she let it be. So she sat still, listening, not moving, not acknowledging it. She counted in her head, 1, 2, 3. The silence stretched thin and brittle, and then the walls sighed. A deep, shifting groan like the motel was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Kathy's spine went rigid. Julie shifted again, rolling onto her side, her breath even, unaware. The sound was not the storm, not the pipes, and not the wood settling. It was inside the walls. Or, no, it was the walls. They were breathing. Kathy clenched her hands in her lap, her fingernails digging into her palms. The sensation crawled under her skin, pressing into her skull, into the back of her neck. She closed her eyes. Don't move. Don't breathe too loud. Don't let it know you hear it. The walls creaked. Another slow breath, in and out. And then something shifted inside them. A sound. A soft, wet sliding. Like something dragging itself along the inside of the drywall, pressing against the thin barrier, just beneath the surface. A handprint bloomed against the wallpaper. Kathy's breath hitched. The imprint pushed outward, fingers splayed, the skin beneath it damp, pale, pressing against the brittle surface of the wall, and then it slid downward, smearing. Something was inside the walls. Something was moving through them. Kathy's entire body locked. She wanted to shake Julie awake, wanted to run, wanted to do anything but sit there, frozen. But the instant she moved, she knew. It would hear her. The storm outside raged louder, the wind shrieking through the cracks in the door, shaking the old motel frame. And for the briefest, most horrifying moment, she swore the walls whispered her name. The morning that never felt like daylight. When the sun rose, it didn't feel like morning. The sky was still gray, thick with mist, the air still heavy, carrying the scent of wet earth and something just starting to turn. Kathy hadn't slept. She had stayed awake, body stiff with terror, listening to the wet shifting of something inside the motel walls, listening to the storm drag itself into morning, listening to the whispers that stopped just before sunrise. Julie stretched, rubbing her face. "Shit, I slept like a rock," she muttered. Kathy swallowed the bile that had been sitting in the back of her throat since the moment she saw the handprint on the wall. "Yeah," she rasped. "Me too." Julie yawned, rolling out of bed, heading toward the bathroom. The pipes groaned as she turned on the shower, the steam filling the tiny space almost immediately. Kathy finally moved. Slowly, cautiously, she turned toward the wall. The handprint was gone. The wallpaper looked normal again, like nothing had ever been there at all. Her pulse hammered. She ran a shaking hand through her hair, exhaling sharply. The whispering had stopped, but she knew it hadn't left. Not really. And the old man who knew too much. They didn't speak much as they checked out of the motel. Benjamin Benbows stood behind the counter as before, unmoving, like he had been standing there all night. Like he had never left the spot at all. His black eyes flicked toward Kathy. He knew. She could feel it, but he didn't say anything. Just smiled. She followed the others out the door into the overcast daylight, but even outside the feeling remained. Something was still watching. Something was waiting. Sean suggested they stop at the general store before heading out. Except Kathy didn't argue it. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that leaving town without knowing more felt worse than staying. The general store was the same as before, dusty, smelling of old wood and something deeper, and Clarence Benbow, the blind old man, was waiting for them. Sitting in his rocker, his milky white eyes facing the door, though he could not see, he smiled as they walked in. "You came back," he murmured. The air in Kathy's lungs tightened. She didn't answer. Julie grabbed a few snacks off the shelf, moving fast, her movements tense. Connor hung back near the door. Sean walked toward the counter, standing stiffly. Clarence tapped his cane against the wood, that same slow, steady rhythm. His head turned slightly toward Kathy. "You hear them yet?" Her stomach dropped. Sean froze, his shoulders going rigid. Kathy didn't answer. Clarence grinned. "You will." Julie slapped a few crumpled bills on the counter, grabbing a bag and turning toward the door. "We're leaving." Kathy hesitated, just for a second. Clarence's fingers twitched against his cane. "You're already marked," he murmured. Julie's hand latched onto Kathy's wrist, yanking her toward the exit. Clarence laughed, low, gravelly, a sound that didn't quite match the age of his body. Kathy didn't look back, but as they stepped out of the store, into the dull light of the morning, she swore she heard him whisper something beneath his breath, something that sounded like her name, and the thing that followed. They drove fast. Julie's hands were tight on the wheel, her jaw locked, her body stiff with barely contained panic. No one spoke. No one even turned on the radio. The road stretched ahead, the forest thinning, the sky slowly brightening, but not fully. There was something wrong with the daylight here. Like the sun could never fully burn away the things that lived beneath the trees. Kathy stared out the window. The trees blurred, the spaces between them darkened, and in those spaces, a figure, not far, not deep, standing between the trunks, keeping pace with the car, watching, and then, gone. Kathy's stomach twisted into knots. They were leaving Lebanon, but Lebanon wasn't leaving them. Chapter 7. The Silence Before the Fall. The road away from Lebanon. The further they got from Lebanon, the lighter the air felt. Not completely, not like before, but enough. Enough that Julie's shoulders finally untensed, that her grip on the wheel loosened, that the sharp, panicked energy that had driven them through the twisting backroads started to fade into something closer to exhaustion than fear. The trees along the highway thinned, giving way to wide fields, stretches of farmland dotted with sagging barns and rusted fences. The sky had finally cleared, the storm left behind, pushed back toward the thick woods they had escaped from. Kathy still didn't fully believe it was over, but for the first time in hours, in days, she wanted to. Julie let out a breath that sounded too heavy for her small frame, rubbing at her temple. "I feel like I haven't stopped driving for a month." Sean made a weak sound, something that might have been a laugh if it had more energy behind it. "We should have just gone to Florida." Connor shifted in the back seat, sitting up from where he had been slouched against the window, stretching his arms over his head. "Nah, Florida's worse," he muttered. "They got weird shit, too." Julie exhaled sharply. "Florida's weird isn't our weird." Kathy managed a small smile. It almost felt normal again. The road stretched ahead, open and empty, the town miles behind them now. The GPS flickered, showing a few small gas stations up ahead, clusters of tiny towns dotting the landscape before they reached the highway out of Missouri completely. "We'll stop at the next gas station," Julie said, eyes still on the road. "Fill up, get real food, not just..." She waved vaguely toward the floorboards where crumpled bags of chips and protein bars had started to pile. Crap. No one argued. It felt like a real plan, something solid, something that wasn't just reacting to whatever the hell they had been running from. Sean glanced over his shoulder toward the back seat, where Connor was already half asleep again, his head tilted toward the window. "You good?" Connor hummed, one hand lazily waving. "Mm-hmm." Julie sighed again, easing the car into a more comfortable cruise. For the first time since the trip started, since the river, since the motel, since the whispers in the walls, no one felt the need to look over their shoulder, and that was a mistake. The last reminder. The gas station was small, sitting alone on the edge of a barely there town, the kind of place that was a mile long at most, with a few boarded-up shops and a diner that looked like it had been in business since the 50s. The neon open sign flickered faintly in the dusty window, buzzing like a dying insect trapped in glass. Julie pulled into the lot, parking next to the only other vehicle, an old farm truck that looked like it had been sitting there for hours. Connor was already stirring, blinking blearily as he rubbed his face. Kathy stepped out of the car, stretching, her limbs aching from the tension she hadn't even realized she'd been holding. The air was different here. Crisp, open, nothing like the dense, suffocating heaviness of Lebanon. She let herself breathe. Inside, the gas station smelled of cheap coffee and motor oil, the linoleum floors scuffed and faded, the shelves stocked with the usual road trip necessities, candy bars, jerky, cans of soda lined in neat, organized rows. It was so normal, so mind-numbingly, comfortably normal. Kathy let herself relax. Maybe it really was over. Julie grabbed a few bottles of water, a bag of peanuts. Sean was already at the counter, handing over a few bills for the gas. Connor had wandered toward the coolers in the back, scanning the energy drinks like he was making a life-altering decision. And then, "Y'all passing through?" Kathy turned toward the cashier, an older woman, mid-60s, hair pinned back in a tight, no-nonsense bun. Her eyes were sharp, dark, the kind that had seen too much for too long. Julie shrugged, heading out of Missouri. The woman nodded, her fingers drumming against the counter. "You stopped in Lebanon?" The room felt colder. Julie hesitated. "Just passing through," she said slowly. The woman's gaze didn't waver. "Smart to keep moving." Something tightened in Kathy's chest. The cashier tilted her head slightly, her voice lowering, like she was measuring each word before letting it fall. "They don't like it when people stay too long." Julie's hand clenched around the bag in her grip. "Who's they?" The woman didn't answer right away. She glanced toward the window, out into the open lot, the stretch of road beyond it. Then, slowly, she leaned forward. And for the first time since they walked in, her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Just don't go back." Then she rang up their things as if nothing had been said at all. And the memory starts to fade. By the time they hit the state line, the mood had shifted completely. The tension that had wrapped around them like a second skin was finally peeling away, left behind with the cracked pavement of Missouri's backroads. Sean stretched, pressing his forehead to the cool glass of the window. "Never coming back here," he muttered. Julie snorted. Seconded. Connor was half asleep again, his hoodie pulled up over his face. Even Kathy let her mind drift, her eyes scanning the fields rolling by, watching the horizon open up, stretching further than she had seen it in days. The gas station cashier's words still lingered, tucked into the back of her mind, but they felt distant now, like something she could convince herself was just paranoia, a weird local thing, nothing more. She didn't feel watched anymore, didn't feel the prickling heat of something just out of sight, of something waiting in the spaces between moments. She didn't dream of the river, didn't hear the whispers anymore. For the first time in a long time, she actually believed they had gotten away. Dreams that feel too real. The motel they stopped at was clean, brightly lit, the parking lot lined with neatly painted spaces, the lobby smelling like actual disinfectant instead of mildew and cigarette smoke. Nothing about it felt wrong. Nothing about it felt alive. Kathy let herself relax, stretching out on the bed, listening to the sound of the TV playing softly in the background, while Sean flipped through channels. Julie was showering. Connor was asleep before his head even hit the pillow. It felt normal. And when Kathy finally let herself sleep for the first time in days, She didn't expect the dream. Didn't expect to wake up standing at the edge of the Nyangwa River, the moon a bloated thing in the sky, the trees stretching taller, twisted into wrong shapes. Didn't expect the water to be still. Didn't expect to see something standing on the opposite bank, watching, waiting. The moment her breath hitched, the figure's head snapped toward her, and in the silence, in the space between heartbeats, the whispering returned, louder than before, closer than before, inside her bones, inside her head. Kathy woke with a gasp, hands gripping the sheets, her skin damp with sweat. The room was quiet, normal, just a dream, but deep down, in the marrow of her being, she knew. They were not done with her yet, and they would never be done. Chapter 8. The Fracture Begins. The Dream That Wouldn't Fade. Kathy sat on the edge of the motel bed, her fingers curled into the thin sheets, staring at the carpet beneath her feet. Her body still felt wrong, like she hadn't fully woken up, like something from the dream had followed her out. The air in the room was cool, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. The window was closed, the curtains pulled tightly shut. Nothing about the room felt off, but she did. Her skin still tingled, that lingering sensation of something watching, something too close to her ears, whispering into the hollow spaces in her skull. She pressed a hand to her forehead, swallowing down the nausea curling in her stomach. The dream had been too vivid. The river, the figure on the bank, and the whisper, louder than before, inside her, reaching into the places she didn't want to acknowledge. She could still hear it. Not the words, not exactly it, but the echo of them, faint, a presence that had not yet left. She inhaled deeply, trying to push it back, bury it beneath the mundane reality of the morning. The motel was normal, the town was normal, they had left Lebanon behind. And yet, the feeling in her chest was not normal. The others. Julie came out of the bathroom, toweling her hair dry, steam curling from the cracked door behind her. "You look like shit," she muttered, tossing the damp towel onto her bed. Kathy blinked, shaking herself. "I didn't sleep well," Julie grunted, grabbing her phone off the nightstand. "No one did." She was right. Sean was sitting at the cheap motel table, scrolling through his phone, a deep crease between his brows. Connor had barely spoken since waking, his movements slow, heavy, like his body was dragging more than just exhaustion behind him. No one said what they were thinking, that they all felt it, the weight, the thing pressing against the back of their skulls, trailing behind them even now. Julie sighed, rubbing her hands over her face. "We need to get home." Sean nodded, pushing to his feet. "No arguments here." Connor exhaled through his nose, standing with a stiffness that wasn't from sleep. No one wanted to be here anymore. No one wanted to acknowledge why. The final stop before the long drive. They pulled into a small-town diner, the kind with a single row of booths and an old jukebox in the corner, its neon lights flickering dimly in the morning haze. It smelled like grease and coffee, the air thick with the scent of frying bacon and something vaguely burnt. It should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Not really. Kathy sat in the booth across from Julie, staring at the thin menu, the words blurring slightly. She was too tired to focus, too caught in the way the edges of her vision felt hazy, like the dream hadn't fully let her go. The waitress came by, a woman in her late 50s, her hair piled into a messy bun, her uniform slightly too big for her thin frame. She poured coffee into their mugs without asking, the scent curling into the air. Julie muttered a thank you, rubbing at her temples. The woman lingered for a second, her dark eyes scanning them carefully. Kathy felt it immediately. The way the woman's gaze paused on her just a little too long. The way her lips pressed together, something unreadable in her expression. Then, just as quickly, she turned away. Kathy's stomach twisted. Something about the woman's stare had been too knowing. Like she could see something on them, something they couldn't wash away. Julie sighed, blowing on her coffee. "I feel like I could sleep for a week." Sean grunted in agreement, stirring cream into his mug, watching the liquid swirl. Connor didn't say anything, didn't touch his coffee. Kathy finally tore her eyes from the waitress, focusing on her own reflection in the dark liquid of her mug. Her hands shook slightly. She curled them into fists beneath the table. The first crack. Halfway through breakfast, Connor got up without a word, heading for the bathroom. Julie barely looked up. Sean frowned, but said nothing. Kathy, though, she watched. The way he moved. The way his shoulders were too rigid, his head tipped slightly to the side, like he was listening to something they couldn't hear. He walked past the counter, past the old radio playing faintly behind it. As he passed, the radio crackled. Static. A single burst of it, sharp and grating, too loud for just an old signal failing. The sound cut through her skull, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. Then, gone, like it had never been there. Julie barely noticed, scrolling through her phone. Sean sipped his coffee, but Kathy knew it was starting. Again. The static had felt familiar, like something from a distant memory, something from before Lebanon, before the motel, before the river, something just out of reach. She swallowed, gripping the table's edge. Julie exhaled. Let's just get through the day. Kathy didn't respond, because she wasn't sure the day was what they needed to get through. The long drive and the return of the shadows. They drove in shifts, the road stretching endlessly ahead, the horizon a flat gray smear of nothing. The further they got, the less the weight of Lebanon sat on their chests. But it was still there, lingering, shifting beneath their skin. Julie was the first to fall asleep, her body curled against the window, arms tucked under her hoodie. Sean drove, silent. Connor sat in the back, still too quiet, his head tilted toward the window, watching the landscape blur past. Kathy couldn't sleep. She kept her eyes on the side mirror, on the stretch of road behind them. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that she couldn't stop looking. The first time she saw it, it was just a flicker, a shadow in the distance standing on the side of the highway, too far back to make out details, too far back to be real. She blinked. It was gone. She swallowed, her heart skipping once, hard against her ribs. The second time, it was closer. A figure standing just at the edge of the road, still, waiting, watching them pass. Her breath hitched. The third time, it was in the mirror, in the back seat, behind Connor. The shadow of a man, head tilted too far, black holes where his eyes should be. Then, gone. Kathy jolted, her breath shaking. She turned in her seat, her pulse hammering. Connor was staring at her, eyes dark, unblinking, like he already knew what she had seen. The moment stretched, then a slow, small smile curled at the edge of his mouth. Not his smile, something else's, something wearing him, and in the small space between them, beneath the hum of the car's engine, she swore she heard it. A whisper, a voice, low, faint. We never left. Chapter 9. The Breaking Point. The last stop before hell. The gas station was small, just off the highway, one of those places that didn't seem to exist on any map. A single flickering light buzzed under the metal awning, casting long, sickly shadows across the cracked pavement. Julie pulled the car in, the tires crunching over gravel damp with old rain, the darkness beyond the lot pressing too close, thick like a living thing. No one spoke. No one had spoken in miles. Connor hadn't moved since the whisper in the back seat. Hadn't blinked, hadn't shifted, hadn't said a single word. Just sat there, watching. His fingers twitching against his thigh like something inside him was waking up. Kathy knew. Sean knew. Julie. She felt it too, even if she was trying to ignore it. Something was wrong with Connor. Something had been wrong since they left Lebanon, and it was about to unravel. Julie sighed, rubbing at her eyes, reaching for the door handle. I'll pump. Someone grab drinks. She was too tired to notice the way Sean was staring at Connor now, the way his fingers had gone white-knuckled against the edge of the seat, his body tense, on edge, waiting. Kathy swallowed, pushing the door open, stepping onto the cool pavement. The night was too still, too quiet. The gas station looked empty, but the door was unlocked. The neon open sign buzzing faintly in the window, casting a dim red glow into the dark. She walked inside and stepped into hell. The slaughterhouse. The smell hit her first. Iron, rot, blood soaking into tile. The store was empty. No clerk behind the counter, no customers browsing the shelves. Only the flickering fluorescent lights, buzzing against the silence, casting harsh, unnatural shadows across the aisles. Then she saw it. the first body. Sprawled across the floor near the coolers, a man in a baseball cap, his stomach ripped open, the contents spilling onto the tile in a slick, glistening pile. His eyes were gone, scooped out, the sockets black holes sinking deep into his skull, something wet smeared around them, like whatever did this had been digging for more than just sight. Kathy's breath hitched, a soft sound, a gurgle, her head snapped up. Another figure slumped against the counter, the gas station clerk, or what was left of him. His throat was a ragged mess, the skin torn in thick, uneven strips, his chest rising shallow, slow, like he was barely holding on to life. His lips moved. Something bubbled in his throat, thick and wet. She took a step forward. A hand shot out, gripping her ankle. Kathy choked back a scream, stumbling backward. The clerk's fingers dug into her jeans, nails splitting as they scraped against fabric, the force of it too strong for someone barely clinging to breath. His mouth opened, something thick spilling down his chin. And he spoke. But the voice that came out wasn't his. Not human. Not right. A deep, buried whisper, something ancient and rotting, curling into her ears, her skull, her bones. "You brought it with you." Kathy ripped herself free, stumbling toward the door, heart hammering, breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts. Sean stood in the doorway, his eyes locked onto the carnage behind her, his face twisted in horror. Then, a sound behind him, a wet, crunching noise, like teeth breaking through bone. Kathy barely had time to react before Julie screamed. The first killing. Julie was on the ground, a mess of blood and struggle, her fingers scrabbling against the pavement, trying to push herself up. Her body jerked violently, convulsing, her mouth opening on a breathless, choked sob of pain. And above her, Connor. No, not Connor. Something wearing his skin. His face wasn't his anymore, his features stretched, his jaw too wide, his eyes black. Deep, pupilless voids. His fingers were sunk into Julie's stomach, buried to the knuckles, twisting, pulling. Kathy froze. Sean moved. With a roar of panic and fury, he threw himself forward, grabbing Connor, ripping him off Julie, sending them both crashing to the ground. Julie made a sound, a gurgling wheeze, blood bubbling at her lips. She tried to move, tried to speak, but she was bleeding out fast, her insides spilling onto the pavement, steaming against the cold. Her fingers twitched, reaching for Kathy. Kathy lunged forward, hands grabbing for her, trying to pull her up, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to do anything. Julie choked. Her eyes met Kathy's, and something in them broke. She exhaled one final shuddering breath. Then, nothing. Kathy's hands were sticky with her blood, warm and cooling too fast, soaking into her jeans, pooling beneath Julie's lifeless body, and then a laugh, low, garbling. Kathy looked up. Connor, or what used to be Connor, was standing again. His teeth were too sharp now. His hands were still slick with Julie's blood, his lips curled into something close to a smile. Sean stood between them, panting, shaking, his hands covered in defensive wounds from trying to fight him off. But it wasn't Connor, not anymore. It was whatever had come with them from Lebanon, whatever had been waiting inside him, wearing him, twisting him. And now, it wanted more. The escape, but not for all. Sean moved first. He grabbed Kathy's arm, pulling her up, dragging her toward the car. Kathy's body wasn't working right, her limbs numb, her brain struggling to process the reality of what had just happened. Julie was dead. Connor wasn't Connor, and whatever was inside him wasn't stopping. Sean yanked the car door open, shoving her inside. Kathy turned, heart pounding. Connor stood in the lot, his body loose, too relaxed, his head tilting to the side like a predator watching prey. Then, he moved, fast, too fast. Sean barely had time to slam his door before Connor was on the hood of the car, fingers scraping against the glass, his mouth twisting open in something that wasn't a scream, wasn't a growl, something worse. Sean threw the car into reverse, tires screeching against the pavement, engine roaring as the vehicle jerked backward. Connor didn't fall off. He crawled forward, dragging his body across the windshield, his fingers pressing against the glass so hard it cracked beneath them. Kathy's breath shook. Then, Sean slammed it into drive. The car lurched forward at full speed. Connor didn't jump, didn't fall. He let go. Let them go. He stood in the rearview mirror, watching them disappear down the highway, his body silhouetted against the buzzing gas station lights, smiling, because he knew. They weren't escaping. They had never been escaping. They were only going where it wanted them to go, and it wasn't done yet. This chapter explodes into horror, ramping up the nightmare, the killings beginning in full force, no more restraint, no more illusion of safety. Chapter 10. The Last One Standing. The highway to hell. The car screamed down the highway, the tires grinding against the pavement, the smell of burning rubber thick in the air. Sean's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his breathing ragged, his chest rising and falling too fast, too shallow. Kathy sat in the passenger seat, blood drying on her hands, her pulse a sharp, painful hammering against her ribs. She still wasn't sure what had just happened. Julie was dead, Connor was gone, and whatever had been inside him wasn't finished. The gas station was far behind them now, the glow of the flickering neon light swallowed by the night, but the weight in the car was thick, suffocating. It wasn't over, not yet. The road stretched ahead, empty, dark, the headlights cutting a narrow path through the black. Kathy couldn't stop looking in the side mirror. Something was coming. She knew it. She could feel it. The air in the car felt wrong, like something else was in there with them, sitting in the back seat where Connor had been. Sean wiped a trembling hand over his mouth. "We need to get to a town," he muttered, his voice rough, raw from panic. Kathy swallowed, her throat too dry. "Where?" Sean didn't answer. Because he didn't know, because there was nowhere left to go. They were already dead. They just didn't know when it would happen yet. Never saw it coming. The first hit came fast. Too fast. Something slammed into the car, the impact so sudden, so violent, that the wheel jerked out of Sean's hands, the entire vehicle lurching sideways. The back spun out, the tires screeching, the car sliding across the asphalt, sparks bursting where the metal skidded against the pavement. Kathy screamed, her hands bracing against the dashboard, the seatbelt cutting into her chest. Sean fought for control, but it was too late. The second hit came harder, a shape, a blur of something pale, something long-limbed and fast, struck the driver's side, and the glass exploded inward. The windshield shattered, fragments of it raining over Kathy's lap, her face, her arms. Sean's head snapped sideways, and then the third hit. Something ripped through the window. Something took Sean. He didn't even have time to make a sound. 1 second he was there, hands gripping the wheel, mouth open in shock, blood sliding down his face from the shattered glass. The next, gone. Pulled from the car like he had never been there at all. The vehicle spun out, tires lifting off the road. And then, impact. The world went black. The nightmare doesn't stop. Kathy woke to the taste of blood. Her vision swam, her body pressed against the crumpled remains of the passenger door. The car tilted sideways, half on the road, half in a ditch. Her seatbelt had saved her. For now. She groaned, pain crackling through her ribs, her wrist throbbing where she had slammed it against the dash. The windshield was gone. The driver's seat was empty. Sean was gone. Just gone. No body, no blood. Nothing but deep claw marks raked through the fabric of the seat. Kathy's breath came too fast, too sharp. Move! She unbuckled, her limbs shaking, her body screaming in protest as she forced herself through the broken remains of the car door. The road was quiet, empty, but not for long. A sound came from the trees, low, wet, chewing. Kathy's stomach turned. She didn't want to see, didn't want to know, but she had to. She turned her head. And there, just beyond the glow of the shattered headlights, she saw it. Sean, or what was left of him. His body was sprawled across the gravel, his chest a gaping hole, his ribs bent backward, snapped like brittle twigs. Something was kneeling over him, something pale, wrong, Connor, or what used to be him. His hands were buried in Sean's torso, his fingers twisting through organs, pulling, digging, eating. Kathy's breath caught in her throat. The thing that wore Connor's skin lifted its head and smiled. Sean's blood smeared across his mouth, his eyes black voids, his teeth too sharp now, too jagged. "You were never getting away," he murmured. His voice was a ruined thing. Something had hollowed him out from the inside. Something had taken him over completely, and Kathy was next. She ran. Nowhere left to go. The woods were a blur of darkness, tree trunks whipping past, the ground uneven, sharp branches clawing at her skin. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. She just ran. Behind her she could hear it, the slow, steady footsteps. Not hurried, not panicked, because it didn't need to rush. It knew it would catch her. Kathy's breath hitched, her lungs burning, her heart slamming against her ribs. The trees stretched taller, their shadows twisting, the sky darkening despite the moon. The air grew thick, heavy, suffocating. She was running into its territory now, running into its arms. A root snagged her foot. She collapsed forward, her hands slamming into the damp earth, dirt grinding into her palms. A shadow fell over her. Connor's voice was right behind her ear. "You were the last one I wanted, you know." Kathy whimpered, her muscles locking up, her body frozen as a cold breath drifted across her neck. "I wanted to save you for last." Something touched her shoulder. Not fingers. Something wrong. Cold. Wet. Like a limb that had been dead too long, the skin peeling, the muscle rotting. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her body betrayed her, locking up completely. And then, she felt it, teeth sinking into her shoulder. A pain so sharp, so deep, that her vision exploded white. She screamed. The end of everyone. She woke up in the dirt, alone. The woods were silent now. No whispers, no shadows, no footsteps. The pain was still there, burning into her shoulder, deep, buried. Something had marked her, something had let her live. Or worse, something had taken root inside her. She staggered to her feet, her body numb, distant, like it didn't fully belong to her anymore. Sean was gone. Julie was gone. Connor was never Connor, and Kathy. She was the only one left, but she knew. She wasn't alone. Not really. Not anymore. She turned her head, just slightly, and for the briefest moment, she swore she saw it, the figure, standing at the tree line, watching, waiting. And inside her skull, the whispers started again. The police station. A girl covered in blood. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their glow too harsh, too sterile, making the blood smeared across Kathy's skin look black in the dim reflection of the one-way mirror. She sat in a cold metal chair, her wrists resting on the scratched surface of the interrogation table, her fingers dried with crusted red. Her clothes were filthy, torn in places, the fabric stiff with soaked-in horror. The officers around her kept their distance. They didn't know what to do with her. A girl found on the side of a highway, barefoot, shivering, blood soaked into her jeans, her arms, her hair. No sign of a crash, no sign of Sean, and no sign of anyone. Just her, alone, a survivor. That's what they were calling her. The lone survivor of some unspeakable tragedy. Kathy didn't correct them. She didn't say anything at all. The interrogation, the lie she let them believe. The detective across from her was older, his face lined with the weight of too many cases gone unsolved, too many bodies found with no real answers to give their families. His hands were folded in front of him, his gaze steady, assessing. "Tell me what happened." Kathy blinked. Her throat ached. Her voice felt raw, like she hadn't spoken in days. Maybe she hadn't. She licked her lips, tasting iron, sweat, something sour, something that wasn't fully hers anymore. She could tell the truth. She could tell them about the motel, about the whispers in the walls, about the river that had swallowed bodies whole and spat them back out wrong. She could tell them about the thing that had worn Connor's skin, about the way it had smiled at her, about the moment she felt its teeth sink into her shoulder. She could tell them that she wasn't alone anymore, that something was inside her now. But she didn't. She inhaled slowly, and she lied. "We got lost," she whispered, her voice cracking on the words. The detective leaned in slightly, listening. "Something hit our car. I don't know what. Sean lost control." Her hands shook as she pressed them into her lap. "We crashed. She swallowed, her eyes burning, her pulse beating an uneven rhythm against her ribs. "I think I blacked out." The detective's expression didn't change. "You were found almost 10 miles from where we recovered your vehicle." Kathy blinked slowly. "I was looking for help," she murmured. Another pause. Another slow, measured silence. Then the detective nodded, and just like that, the lie became the truth. the official record of what happened that night. Months later, a ghost of herself in civilization. The city was different now. Or maybe she was. Kathy sat at the window of her small apartment, a cup of coffee cooling between her hands, the morning sun spilling pale gold across the wooden floor. Her apartment was clean, neat, normal. It wasn't home. She didn't think anywhere would ever be home again. She had gone through the motions of being a survivor, had let them tell her how lucky she was to be alive, to be breathing, to have escaped whatever terrible accident had taken her friends. She had gone to therapy. She had answered reporters' questions. She had even cried when she was supposed to. She was good at pretending now, good at making them believe she was still just a girl, just Kathy, just someone who had barely made it out with her life, good at making them think she was still human. But she knew the truth. She could feel it, moving inside her, shifting beneath her ribs, a second heartbeat that wasn't hers, a whisper that came in the quiet moments between breaths, between thoughts, curling at the edges of her mind, dragging its fingers across her skull. She was not alone. She had never been alone since that night, and soon, she wouldn't be Kathy anymore. Found her. The knock came just after midnight, soft, measured, like it had been waiting for the right time. Kathy stood, slowly, setting down her coffee cup, the ceramic clicking against the glass table. Her pulse was steady, calm. She already knew. She knew who was waiting on the other side. She walked to the door, her bare feet silent against the hardwood. The whisper inside her stirred, waking up, stretching, curling deeper into her spine. It was ready. She was ready. She unlocked the door and opened it. Sheriff Lawton Spivey stood in the hallway. His shotgun was already raised. His eyes were dark, rimmed with exhaustion, but steady, unwavering. He knew. Kathy smiled and lunged. The gun fired, the sound ripping through the silence, the force of it knocking her back, splitting her open, tearing through her ribs. She hit the floor hard, gasping, her vision blurring at the edges. She felt the thing inside her scream, but she did not. She only smiled wider, blood spilling from her lips, teeth red, breath shuddering out in uneven bursts. The sheriff stepped forward, his expression blank, his jaw locked tight. He aimed again. Kathy let out a slow, shaking breath and laughed. The whisper inside her was still laughing too, even as the second shot tore through her skull, even as everything went black, even as the last echo of the Benbows slipped into the walls, waiting, watching, ready to crawl into someone else. The end. Epilogue, the last whisper. The apartment was silent. The blood had stopped spreading, soaking into the cracks of the wooden floor, seeping beneath the rug like a stain that would never wash out. The sheriff stood over the body, shotgun still clenched in his hands, the barrel smoking faintly, the scent of gunpowder mixing with the thick metallic tang of fresh death. Kathy's eyes were open, but there was nothing left inside them. Whatever had been inside her, whatever had stretched beneath her skin, wearing her like a shell, it was gone. But not dead, never dead. Sheriff Spivey exhaled sharply, lowering the gun, his grip achingly tight, his fingers twitching against the stock. His shoulders felt heavy, not from exhaustion and not from relief, but from certainty. This wasn't over. It was never over, not with them, not with the Benbows. He turned, stepping toward the door, pausing just for a second, scanning the room one last time. The walls were still, the air was thick, too thick, like something was holding its breath. His pulse thrummed in his throat, a slow, heavy drumbeat that matched the silence too well. The whisper came just as he stepped across the threshold. Soft, barely there. A voice that was not Kathy's, a voice that was nothing human. "We'll find another." Spivey stiffened. Slowly, too slowly, he turned his head. The air shifted. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened. And in the reflection of the darkened TV screen, he saw it, a figure standing just behind him, smiling, waiting. The shotgun felt useless in his hands. His breath hitched, and then the screen blinked to static. The lights flickered. The whispering multiplied. Sheriff Spivey closed his eyes and let the darkness take him.